This is my story of how God saved my life nearly 10 years ago after I tried to commit suicide. 10 years ago, looking from the outside in, I probably didn't seem like the type of person who would want to kill myself. I was pretty well liked. I was a strong athlete. I picked up on stuff pretty quickly, and I was always smiling and laughing. Really, that's what you saw from the outside, though. On the inside, I was hurting. I was helpless, I was hopeless, and what I thought at the time, I thought that I was fighting something all by myself, which was the mental demons in my head of depression and anxiety. On February 7th, 2007, I really let the demons get to me, and my whole life I've believed in God, but I kind of just believed. I didn't always just let him into my life like I have now, and February 7th, I had planned to kill myself. And that whole entire week, I had really went into detail of how I was going to do it. I've always been a very determined person. When I put my mind on a goal, I really try to go after it, and that's exactly what happened that week. I was determined to kill myself, and nothing was going to get in my way. That whole week was really the only week I'd ever thought about killing myself. I didn't have any signs to anybody. I didn't tell anybody about it. And honestly, I thought I probably was the only one in the world that felt like I wanted to take my life. So that week, I wrote some suicide notes. I planned everything to a T. I knew my parents were going to be gone. So what I did is I told them I was at intramural basketball games with my friends, and what I told my friends was I was with my parents. I got in my car, I went home. I had left the suicide notes in my car so nobody would find them, and I put them on my bed that night. And I remember specifically leaving my room spotless. So they would have a place to remember me, and I never wanted to hurt anybody, my family or my friends. But I just couldn't do life anymore. So I left the notes on my bed, and I remember looking back at my bed with the notes, and I remember really thinking that I didn't want to die. It was just, I didn't know how to cope with everything that was going on in my life at that time. And, nothing extreme was happening. It was just, there was so many things going on in my head that I didn't know how to cope or how to take on by myself. So after I left the notes, I knew there was no turning back. I got out on Interstate 80, and my plan was to speed up to a point where I could jerk my car and completely flip it in hopes to die off of impact. That was my plan, and that wasn't God's plan. Driving down the interstate, I remember I had planned to do it right off of just the Kearney exit. But numerous times I found myself jerking the steering wheel and then redirecting myself back straight. And the reality of that wasn't me redirecting my vehicle. That was God. But the demons kept fighting in my head, and I remember really stiffing the gas pedal and hitting 80 miles an hour, 90, 100. And once I hit 110, I swerved the wheel. And the next thing I knew, I was flying through a fence. And the next thing I knew, really my world just went dark. Luckily, there was a truck driver behind me who saw everything, and he came out and found me laying face up in a ditch, and I was 5 yards away from the Nebraska Platte River. And I just remember waking up absolutely livid. I was livid because I failed, and I knew that I was still alive, and I was so mad and in shock and in so much pain that I couldn't move. And he was talking to me but I wasn't talking back. And the next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance on my way back to Good Sam, and they too were asking me a million questions, but I was so mad that I wasn't talking. And then I remember my world going black again. I was sitting in the emergency room hospital bed, and that's when I woke up again, and I was surrounded by my immediate family. That probably was one of the most shameful moments of my life. And I felt so ashamed and so embarrassed, and at that time I still was so mad that I failed. After they examined me on everything, a police officer confronted me and basically gave me one of two options. I could either let my family take me to Richard Young, or I could be put in a cop car and go to Richard Young. I obviously chose my family, so drove to Richard Young, and I don't remember anything on the drive or even checking in or anything. And what I thought, February 7th, I thought that was my darkest day. I think February 8th in the morning might have been even darker. I remember waking up in a white brick room. I was locked in. I had nothing but a bed and a bed sheet, and I just felt completely alone. And everything from there, though, it's just like the light started to shine. And after that moment, they let me take a shower, and then immediately I had interventions or family meetings or whatever you want to call them with my family. And the first thing that they told me was, "You were meant to be here." And in my head I'm thinking, this is absolutely crazy. Like, I don't want to be here, and I'm not meant to be here. But they told me 50 yards in front of my wreck scene was a little yellow sign that said, "Trust Jesus." And kind of just at that moment, I knew that's what I was supposed to be doing, and that I was supposed to be there. And a note that my sister had left for me, she had came and saw me at breakfast the next day, and she had wrote me a letter in regards to how determined my tracks and my plan had been. And just looking at the pictures from the car accident, it obviously showed I was pretty determined to kill myself. However, numerous times God walked in and God stepped in, and like I mentioned earlier, there was many times that I had jerked the wheel, but God took the wheel and redirected it straight. I really have no idea how I survived it after looking at pictures of my car, because my whole entire car was smashed in except for the driver's seat. And just to have landed just 5 yards away from the Platte River, I just feel like God had to have been holding me that whole entire time. And He was. From then on, I've really just been trusting Jesus with my life. And for about 8.5 years, that's all I've been doing, is just trusting Him with my life. And I think there's a difference between trusting and relying. And I got to a point after 8.5 years that I was still battling with anxiety and depression. It never was to a point where I would ever do anything to myself again. And it still is at that point where I would never do anything again, because I know God's plans are greater for me. But I still battle, and the difference is I know how to cope and I know how to beat it. The past 2 years, I've done a lot of different things, and the number one thing that I've done is I've just prayed to God. I knew that I couldn't do it anymore, and I knew there had to be something bigger to life than still having all of these demons in my head. And passing those over to God and asking Him to take the anxieties, the worries, even when there's good times and there are bad times, I give them to Him. For all that time, I was on antidepressants, and I know that they work for some people. However, for me, I felt like I was in a constant fog. And after just a little bit of really giving reliability over to God with my life, I didn't need him anymore. So with the help of a doctor, I slowly came off my medicine, and for 2 years now I've been antidepressant free. Something that I also took along in all those 8.5 years is I had been living with a cover-up story. In the society, it's not talked about much, suicide or mental illness, depression, anxiety. I think people think it's not normal, that they're not supposed to feel that way. And really, in my mind, it's okay to not feel okay, but it's definitely not good when you're not talking to somebody about it. And what I've learned in the past 2 years of just talking to God about it and to more people about it is I'm definitely not the only one that's fighting these and coping and trying to beat them. There are a lot of people doing this, and when I finally let God in on that and took the cover up of my car accident, swerving for a deer, a lot of things and a lot of light just started to shine in. And for all that time too, I have never forgiven myself for what I did. And I knew that right after my wreck and after asking God to forgive me, I knew he forgave me, but I hadn't forgave myself. It wasn't until about 6 or 7 months ago when I finally forgave myself, and it honestly was like a breath of fresh air. And I can't say how much I just have to go on every day with just relying on God. And for the first time in 10 years, I went back to my wreck scene last night and was trying to look for the Trust Jesus sign, and I couldn't find it. And I think that goes a lot to say about life too. A lot of times we go through life and we're waiting for God to show us a sign, or maybe he's not acting in our life like we want him to, but he's got a plan. And even though we are not seeing him maybe as active as we want to, he's really got a plan, and he's trying to work it through you. You just have to wait and just keep praying that he guides you through everything and directs your footpaths and everything. And whether you're fighting anxiety or depression or any kind of mental illness, grief, anything, just know that God has your hand and trust Jesus. And I'm living proof that anybody can get through anything, even when you plan to take your own life. Trust Jesus.